Hello, a very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's show, an ongoing war in Yemen fueled by arms sales by Western powers. The US, UK and France are under fire from NGOs. Since the start of the conflict, 5 million people have fled Syria, but the country itself at one point welcomed thousands of refugees. Also coming up, we're joined by an NGO representative from Lebanon. Maya Al-Ammar's organisation is fighting to eradicate child marriage. But first to Yemen, where the conflict shows no signs of abating anytime soon. A Saudi-led coalition began pounding the Houthi movement, reportedly backed by Iran in 2015. 2.5 years later, there's been little shift in the balance of power in the country between the Shiite militia and the ruling government. And increasingly, NGOs are pointing the finger at the international community for a war that's taken some 10,000 lives. Our correspondents take a look at why.
Since the beginning of the conflict, Yemen has been hit by over 15,000 Arab coalition airstrikes. The raids targeted military positions, but also villages, towns, and even the historical center of the capital, Sana'a. Human rights organizations say around a third of the attacks hit civilian areas and represent potential war crimes. The Saudi-led coalition, an alliance of 9 mostly Sunni countries, receives logistical support from the US, France, and the UK. But the NGO Human Rights Watch says it has proof the West also supplies some of the weapons used to carry out these strikes.
Trusted sources and activists send us photos of remnants of weapons that were used in Yemen. In many cases, these weapons killed civilians. And from those, our military and arms experts are able to trace the weapon back.
Among the weapons are these US-made cluster bombs. They're banned in over 100 countries, but in Yemen, they've been used against civilians.
Certainly in terms of the Saudi-led coalition, the US is the largest supplier, but we do know also that France and the UK and other European countries, in fact, sell weapons to these countries that are participating in the bombing campaign.
After Saudi Arabia, the second biggest military player in Yemen is the United Arab Emirates. At Abu Dhabi's latest arms fair, the country proudly showcased the weapons used in the war. Tanks, helicopters, and fighter jets, a lot of them French-made. The likes of Thales, Safran, and Dassault were present at the fair, but also MBDA. The Paris-based European consortium is the missile industry's world leader and sells high-precision weapons to most countries in the region.
Okay, shoot.
This new anti-tank missile system, equipped with a camera and capable of changing trajectory until the last minute, was of particular interest to the Emirati army.
It's very good, it's new, and it's better than the previous versions, and much safer to use.
The French government first needs to give the green light for MBDA to conclude a sale, and the company says it's not responsible for its weapons being used against civilians.
We are France's industrial strong arm, so when France has a particularly strong geopolitical relationship, which is the case today with the countries in the region, France gives us the authorization through a commission to export this or that piece of equipment. The Middle East represents about €1 billion in gross revenue annually.
€1 billion, a third of MBDA's yearly turnover. Human rights groups regularly point to a treaty signed in 2014 by all EU member states. It prohibits the export of weapons to countries likely to commit war crimes, so far without much success.
More than 5 million people have fled Syria since the civil conflict began in 2011. Yet for tens of thousands escaping bloodshed elsewhere, Syria is also a place of refuge. Olivia Salazar-Wenspear brings you the story.
Zahra fled Somalia in 2012, seeking refuge in Damascus. Despite the conflict flaring in Syria at the time, she decided to stay on in the country, judging the situation better than back home, where her daughter was raped and killed.
No country closer to Somalia was safe enough for us to go. There was only Syria. When we arrived here, they didn't ask for a visa or anything. We just climbed down from the plane and walked out of the airport.
In 6.5 years of war, millions of Syrians have been forced to flee their country. But some foreign refugees in Damascus say they had no choice but to stay. Most of them arrived before the beginning of the conflict.
Syria has produced many refugees, and many Syrians are also displaced within the country. But Syria has also welcomed 35,000 refugees, mainly from Iraq, South Sudan and Somalia.
More than 20,000 Iraqis have arrived in Syria since the beginning of the offensive to retake Mosul from the Islamic State group last year. Bartan is a Chaldean Christian and fled Iraq's sectarian conflict in 2007. She met Alexis in Syria, where they went on to marry. Her husband has lived in Damascus for 18 years, and because Syria never recognized South Sudan's recent independence, he has no official identity papers.
When we arrived here, the situation was good. I married a man whose country is also at war and where the situation is terrible. We hoped that the United Nations would help us get out of here, but all our requests have been denied. It's dramatic because the situation got bad here as well. Wherever we go, it gets worse. We don't know what to do.
Some refugees say they nearly got caught up in the fighting near Damascus. But this small suburban church is a haven of peace away from two wars, the one they left behind and the one looming over them daily in Syria.
In Lebanon, there's no legal minimum age for marriage. Some laws allow girls younger than 15 to marry. In fact, according to UNICEF, 6% of girls in the country married before their 18th birthday. Now, these numbers have increased with the influx of Syrian refugees, some 1 million of them. For more on this, let's cross to Maya El Ammar from KAFA, which is an organization that's fighting to bring an end to violence and exploitation against women. She joins us from Beirut. Now, Maya, your organization has spent a great deal of time in the presence of child brides. What do you think you've learned from these meetings?
Well, it is worth mentioning that it is very hard for the girls to reach us because their movement is controlled. But once they do, we know that they're stuck in a cycle of abuse and exploitation by their husbands. And many of the husbands are Lebanese husbands and landlords who exploit these girls. Most of them are Syrian refugees. Some of them are Lebanese, of course. And they suffer from economic hardship. And some of them are pressured to marry by their parents.
Now, talk us through how KAFA, your organization, has been campaigning to bring an end to child marriage in the country.
Well, first we had to begin with creating awareness, more awareness around this topic, because a lot of people in Lebanon did not know that this practice still existed or that it was still legal. So first of all, we had to create a lot of videos, a lot of material, a lot of awareness actions that we conduct on the ground to tell people that it's still legal and that the Lebanese laws allow it, especially the personal status laws. And we do a lot of community work to try and intervene whenever we know parents want to marry off their child. So a lot of peer-to-peer interventions and community-based interventions, especially in the Syrian refugee camps.
Now, you've been talking about the videos that you guys release. We're now seeing also from a stream of artists who are getting involved in the campaigning, setting up movies, for example. But this is happening at the same time as religious leaders are very publicly stating that early marriage is acceptable. Whose voice would you say is louder in Lebanon?
Well, we have to see whose voice is louder in parliament, because it is still very problematic among members of parliament, because not all of them are this influenced by religious leaders. It is true that artists are very impactful and they help us build a public opinion that is against this practice, but then a religious leader says a speech and just tells his followers that this practice is good and that it is religious and that it is valued, and then his followers change their minds, even if they had previously agreed with us. So it is a challenge, but I believe that we're not hopeless yet.
Now, this practice remains more of a problem in rural areas in Lebanon. How do you reach out to those particular communities?
Through other local organizations who work in these rural areas, and through direct intervention whenever we can, and through the media. So we try our best to be able to reach out for them. And whenever violence occurs, we try and coordinate with the police so that they go to the house where the violence is happening, and we take it from there.
And lastly, Maya, the country very recently, in fact last month, passed a legislation to overturn the Marry Your Rapist law. Do you see that as a stepping stone for your own cause?
Well, to be honest, hope is our fate, but we shouldn't be naive. Whenever decision makers make a step forward, then we get so excited and we believe them, especially in the Lebanese context, because they give rights in small pieces and they make us believe that they're doing us a favor. As a matter of fact, Article 522 was not repealed totally. It still applies to minors, and it still applies when there's intercourse with a minor and they allow the marriage, because we still live in a patriarchal society that wants to preserve the so-called honor of the girl or her family. So 522, there is an achievement there, but we should always be cautious because it is not complete. But as I also say that hope is our fate, it doesn't mean that we're going to stop our struggle here.
Maya Ammar, KAFA's communications officer, thank you so much for speaking to us. We end this week's show with Iraq, where international legends played in a match aimed at helping people in the war-torn country forget their hardship for 90 minutes. Some 65,000 spectators flocked to the stadium to cheer on the Iraqi team, who took on retired players Spain's Michel Salgado and Inter Milan defender Marco Materazzi. And that final score was 4-5. And that's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter and podcast. Do stay tuned.
Inside the Americas, presented by Jeannie Godula.
From North America to the southern tip of Patagonia, join us for a look at the latest political, economic, cultural and social news from the Americas.
Inside the Americas on France 24 and France24.com.